Ding, I'm home. I love that. I love that it like chimes so that I know I'm in my own channel. I just feel like there's something quite charming about that. Like fries are done. Ding.
Oh, that's cool. So this Zoom meeting is now streaming live on YouTube. I don't even know how to do that.
Yes. Well, that's brilliant because part of this was doing this with people who don't normally do this. So I can maybe show you something I know, and bring that to the table. So let's talk astrology on the internet. We are in. Welcome everybody to today's eat and greet. I'm so excited to have you guys here. I've been excited to bring different astrologers to the cyber house so we can meet and greet with them and eat and greet with them and see the different topics and type of astrology that's out there. So today we've got Robert Weinstien, who's going to talk about assessing vitality in the chart. Now, we have had some medical talks before, and we were talking a little bit more about impairments or when things are in high excess or very, very low. Now we want to look at where is the real vital force? How do we identify that in the chart? So we're going to get that illuminated today, and it is going to be good. So welcome, Robert, and thank you for agreeing to come over.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation, Stormie. Appreciate meeting with you and talking about astrology today. I'm always excited to talk about astrology, and I'm an acupuncturist for over 17 years, practicing Chinese medicine, acupuncture and Chinese herbal medicine, and also astrology for over 20 years, and putting the two together with medical astrology.
So how did that happen? How did that happen for you? I always love to know how people got there. Were you just doing acupuncture and it naturally led to it, or cosmic explosion? What happened?
Oh man, that's a long story. But essentially, I kind of got into astrology right around the same time that I got into Chinese medicine, actually. And I went to school in Seattle at the Northwest Institute of Acupuncture and Oriental Medicine back in 1998. And that was, of course, when the internet was just kind of coming online too. And I think the internet made astrology a lot more accessible to people. And I started going to this little bookstore called Astrology et al. Here in Seattle, and that was Laura Nalbandian's family bookstore, who is, of course, now she's well known as the conference leader of the NORWAC conference, which her mother started. But I used to go in there and talk to her and talk to her mother and buy books on astrology. And I was studying, Chinese medicine intensively for 4 years, and like to relax, I would study astrology. But I didn't actually get into medical astrology until later. So I was just studying. I didn't realize I didn't really know about medical astrology until probably about 10 years ago or something like that. So I was just into astrology, and I was into Chinese medicine, and I was looking at it, but I didn't really start studying like the more traditional medical astrology systems until about 10 years ago.
And here you are now, huh?
Yeah, I mean, it's like sometimes you have really complex, confusing clients, and you want more information, any information that you can get. And that's where the astrology started coming in. It wasn't like I was charting everybody who came in for treatment, but sometimes you would get stuck on a client that is having very strange symptoms, or they had very unusual reactions to the treatments, and their whole case was just kind of generally confusing. So then I started running charts on those people, and that's when I started looking to the chart for another level of information into the client's health and wellness, illness and disease. And astrology chart is so rich in information. It can tell us about our psychological makeup, right? Our strengths and weaknesses. It can tell us about our spiritual development. It can tell us about finances, love, relationships. So of course it can also tell us about health and wellness, our strength of our vital force, which we're going to talk about today, and also different constitutional strengths and weaknesses, different patterns that suggest we have a constitutional tendency towards certain illnesses, certain ailments. And you will see very clearly in the charts, that some people have a tendency, some people are very kind of, delicate and and just have, chronic illnesses, whereas other people are hardy and, and don't have any illnesses for most of their life. They're just in very good health. And you can oftentimes see, you can see that in the charts, in the natal charts, because the chart is just an energy pattern, right? And those energy patterns can tell us all sorts of things about health and wellness, as we'll look at, the different, how do we approach that? Where do we look for that?
Yeah, that's awesome. It's interesting to see. Oh, I see you brought your cup. Before we jump in here, we better share our cups. This is where I'm at today, guys. I feel like somebody hand created this. I'm not even sure. You know what I mean? It feels like it came from just straight from the kiln. God knows you can't put it in the microwave. I found that out.
It looks hand painted.
Yeah. What do you have
Here's
over
my
there?
cup. My cup is just a local business here. It's a local health food store, which is, I guess, appropriate for our talk today. The Madison Market Central Co-op. It's one of the oldest health food stores in Seattle, where I'm located.
All the Seattle friends will probably be like, yes, I have 2 of those cups as well. So there you go.
And I'm drinking my green tea for the high antioxidants, anti-cancer, antioxidants for long life and long, healthy life. Green tea.
Brilliant. And I have oolong today.
Oh, awesome. Yeah.
I'm oolonging. So we're gonna oolong and do a green tea talk today, you guys. All right, man. Let's get in here. So when you're assessing vitality in someone's chart, take us through that. What's your process? What are you looking for? What are you looking at?
Yeah, so I've kind of over the years, I guess I've been practicing astrology for over 20 years or so now, and I've developed a my own step-by-step approach to the chart, how to break down a chart, how to read a chart. I'm not really associated, there's just so many different types of astrology, and there seems to be like a real, I don't know if it's a conflict, but definitely, you've got your modern evolutionary astrologers and you have your traditional Hellenistic astrologers.
Sure.
These days, it seems like those are the 2 main sort of competing schools, and I'm not really associated with either one. I take aspects from both. I've studied a little bit in both, and I just kind of have my own approach to it. And so first of all, when I look at the chart, the first thing I look at is, of course, I look at the sun, the moon, and the rising sign. I take a quick look at that just to see, what that's going to show, because those are the 3 most important aspects for overall vitality and the quality, the energy patterns and the quality in the person's life. But what I also find is extremely important is the ruler of the ascendant. I always look at the ruler of the ascendant to see kind of what the overall tone is of the chart. And I find that a lot of times the ruler of the ascendant gives us, I'd say in about 75% of the time, it's going to give you a basic general tone for the chart. Of course, you see sometimes these very complex and confusing charts where that's not the case. It's not always going to be, there's never going to be one planet that gives you all the answers. But the ruler of the ascendant is a good place to start. And I use the traditional rulers. Sometimes I consider, okay, well, what if we use the modern ruler in this case? But I use the traditional rulers because the modern rulers spend so much time in a sign, right? I mean, it's like, Neptune is going to spend 15 years in a sign. I mean, Uranus 7 years in a sign. So that, I don't think that that's really that helpful for rulership. So I like the traditional planets for rulership. So we look at the Lord of the Ascendant. We look at the sun, the moon, and the rising sign to get that general picture. We scan the chart for dignity and debility.
Yeah.
Okay, these are very important. And I've just really in the last 5 years or so, I've really just realized how important dignity and debility is. To really memorize those tables of dignity and debility, because they're really important. They're really telling you a lot about the planets and how they're functioning in the signs. Rulership is very important. It's definitely a strength. It indicates strength. Exaltation, I was just reading Chris Brennan's book,
Mhm.
Hellenistic Astrology, this year, and it says exaltation, rulership, when a planet is in the sign that it rules, it's like that planet is comfortable because it's in its own home.
Yeah.
But exaltation, that is said to be a planet sitting on the throne as if it was a king or a queen. So these are really important. Of course, dignity, debility is also important as well to look at. So we scan the chart for dignity and debility. So for example, if the ruler of the ascendant has dignity, that's extremely important. That's very, very favorable. That's very positive, just in general, overall for the chart. But also, I would say for medical health and wellness, strength of the vital force, that's a big plus. Now, there may be other things that are contradicting that, but that is a big plus. So, dignity or debility of the ruler of the ascendant. The sun. The sun is a main indication of vital force.
Mm.
So is Mars. These kind of yang, fiery vitality planets are Mars and the sun. Those are very important, especially if they're in a harmonious, if they have dignity, that's very good. If they're in a harmonious aspect to each other, that's very good for vitality, good health, and resiliency. If they're debilitated, then that's an unfavorable. That's going to be a negative. If the sun, the moon, the ascendant, or Mars is conjunct or in a hard aspect to Saturn, that's going to be an unfavorable. So that's the next thing, is the aspects. I divide the chart up into what I call hard and soft aspects, right?
Sure.
Squares, oppositions versus trines and sextiles. Conjunctions of Saturn are unfavorable. Conjunctions of Jupiter and Venus are favorable. So we look at that. We look at the aspects. And some are maybe don't fall into the hard or soft. Some of them are maybe a little bit neutral. So we can make a neutral category too. But basically, divide the whole chart up into the hard and the soft aspects. And then we pay special attention if the aspect is exact.
Yeah.
And we also pay special attention if the aspect is what we call partile.
Partile.
So in the same degree, right? So we'll look at a chart today that has a Sun square to Saturn. Sun is at 16 degrees Aquarius. It squares Saturn at 16 degrees Taurus. This is one of the charts that you sent me. So that's more powerful because it's partile. So we look at that as well. The aspects, we also look at the houses. Of the sixth house, of course, is very important for health. It's actually a more malefic house traditionally. So it's more a house of illness and health problems. The first house we look at more for vitality and strength. We also pay special attention to oppositions from the 12th to the 6th, because those can create a lot of problems for health, especially like these kind of complicated mind-body problems where the person's psychological problems causes physical health problems.
Yeah.
That's a 12th, 6th house problem. And then we look at the elemental balance also. And, look for deficiencies or excess of elements, especially if someone has no planets in an element, very weak in an element, or an excess, like for example, the same chart, very little, it's not that weak in water, but say, for example, a chart has no water, but it has an excess of fire. That's going to be a problematic energetically. The person's going to have a tendency to overheat and maybe have pathogenic heat problems, inflammation type of problems, or all sorts of problems that have to do with overheating.
Sure.
And dryness, the fire, especially if there's no water, then that fire could create a lot of fluid metabolism problems, and so forth like that. So that's the basic approach. And I mean, you can apply this. This doesn't have to be applied specifically medically. That approach works for any type of approach to astrology, that step-by-step approach that I've outlined. And I make a note for each of those things. Okay, which planets have dignity, which have debility? I make a note going through, okay, what are the soft aspects? What are the hard aspects? Hard aspects to Jupiter and Venus, we're not going to be particularly worried about. Hard aspects to Saturn, Mars, and the outer planets, we're definitely going to be a lot more concerned about those.
Sure.
especially conjunctions and hard aspects to Saturn. Those are always indicate trouble. They always indicate, and they often indicate chronic, stubborn health problems. Um, Saturn is always the bad guy, right? Often the bad guy. Blockages, chronic problems, cold problems. Saturn is cold and dry.
Sure.
So yeah, that's my basic approach.
So in your studies and in your practice, one of the things that I often look for as well, just if I'm kind of doing an assessment of the vitality or the medical portion, is whether Mars is above or below the horizon. Is that something that falls into your practice that you consider?
Not really.
Okay.
Now, I'm not saying that's not important.
Sure, sure.
It's just, yeah, that's kind of like getting in. Are you talking about like whether it's a day chart or a night chart, or you're just looking at whether Mars is above or below?
Well, one of the things I look at is whether Mars is above or below,
Ah,
as well. If it's like Mars and Sun are above, or Mars and Sun are below, or are they separated from each other, to kind
hmm,
of see the impact of what that kind of action would put on this person. Are they warmer? Does this give them a warmer presentation within maybe the body or the metabolism? Or is Mars below and we're looking at something maybe a little bit cooler? So those are just
hmm.
interesting things I find between, everybody has their own little things.
Yeah. I haven't incorporated that, and I haven't incorporated sect too much. I know
Okay.
that's very important in Hellenistic astrology, whether it's a day or a night chart, and that affects how, especially Saturn and Mars, operate differently in day and night charts according to those traditional techniques. But I haven't really incorporated that too much into my personal approach.
Yeah. It's always interesting to find out how people are approaching things, because somewhere we find we have many of the same techniques and a couple little differences along the way.
Definitely. Yeah, like the very famous medical astrologer Judith Hill,
Mhm.
which I've talked to her. I know her pretty well, and I've talked to her quite a bit. She doesn't use Chiron at all. Whereas I do use Chiron, especially if it's very strong in the chart. So
Sure.
I do think it's an important for health and medical stuff.
Yeah. All
So
right.
different people will use different things, as you were saying.
Yeah. That's why if we have all these people over with their cool cups, so we can talk about it. All right. So do we have a chart, or where are we going next?
I'm sure. Yeah, I actually just realized I didn't really introduce myself that well, so I'm just
Yeah,
gonna.
go for it.
I totally forgot to just tell people where I'm coming from. Again, my name is Robert Weinstein, and my company is Source. I have Source Point Acupuncture is my clinic here in Seattle, and I also have a company called Source Point Astrology. The source point of every meridian in the Chinese medical system has what's called a source point, and that's one of the most important points on that channel. So that's where that term comes from. And that's a point where you can access the source chi, the vitality. So that's where I got the term source point acupuncture and source point astrology. I went to the Northwest Institute of Acupuncture and Oriental Medicine from 1998 to 2002, and I've been practicing here in Seattle since 2003. And as I said, I studied astrology with Laura Nalbandian originally, and then have just continued my studies over the last 20 years, and then been combining that medical astrology component together with Chinese medicine, just to bring greater health and well-being and greater understanding to myself and to my clients. And you can, of course, I'm available for, if you have any questions or private consults, medical readings, you can get in touch with me at www.sourcepointastrology.com.
Awesome. And
So yeah,
I'll make sure those are in the description box as well for you guys, so that you can go and check out Robert as well.
great. So yeah, I have a couple of charts I wanted to look at in terms of the vital force, right? Talking about the vital force. And the first thing, a lot of medical astrology talks, if you go to medical astrology talks or webinars, they're always looking at examples of illness and disease in the chart and how that correlates to the different organ systems and the different signs, right? Because each planet corresponds to a different organ system, and each sign corresponds also to different body areas and different systems within the body as well, right? And that's kind of the foundation of medical astrology. But I wanted to do something different, which was look at, well, what would it look like to see someone who just has incredible vital force, like who has almost a supernatural stamina and physical strength? Let me see, I'm gonna get on the screen share here. I don't think I activated my screen share. Okay. And that's not what we want to look at. Here we go. Okay, so we're just going to look at a couple of these here. I'm going to start with Tom Brady, who's a well-known, one of the most famous athletes of the 21st century, right? The famous New England Patriots quarterback. When I was thinking of who has supernatural strength, supernatural physical stamina, he was one of the first people that came to my mind, was Tom Brady. And also LeBron James, the famous NBA star. There were also some other ones, Michael Jordan, Muhammad Ali, Bruce Lee was someone who came to mind. But I thought, like, okay, just before I even looked at Tom Brady's chart, right? He's 9 Super Bowl appearances, 6 wins, 3 losses, 3 league MVP awards. And not only that, but he's played over 20 years in the NFL. I mean, anybody who knows anything about football, that's almost bizarre that anybody could play professional football for 20 years without getting seriously injured. So there had to be something that was just completely unusual about this chart, right? So we take a look at his chart here, and he's born August 3rd, 1977, 11:48 a.m. in San Mateo, California. This is a Rodden rating, AA Rodden rating, which is the highest. I'm not going to go through the whole step-by-step approach, but I just wanted to point out a couple of things that were really noteworthy. Number one, he's got the North Node on the ascendant. The North Node adds energy, so that's very favorable to him. Also, the ruler of the ascendant is a benefic. It's Venus. And lo and behold, it's in a conjunction to Jupiter. Now, it's an out-of-sign conjunction. Okay, that maybe weakens it slightly, but overall, whenever you have a conjunction of the two benefics, it's extremely favorable. It's like an excess of good luck, good fortune, and money, fame, just good luck and good health. It's also beneficial for good health. As we said, the ruler of the ascendant is very important to look at, whether it has dignity. So a conjunction of the ruler ascendant to Jupiter is kind of like having dignity in a way, because it's very favorable. It gives it strength, it gives it vitality, and it gives it good luck. Okay, so that's what I talked about at the beginning when I said that the ruler of the ascendant often will set the tone, for the whole chart. And we can see right off the bat, the ruler of the ascendant here is just very favorable with that conjunction. It's got that conjunction to Jupiter, and it's also got a trine. It's also got a trine to Uranus. What else is interesting about this chart? One of the things that's very interesting about this chart is it has what we call a minor grand trine. Okay, between Mars is in a partile trine to Pluto.
Oh, yeah.
So Mars is at 11:45 Gemini. It's in a trine to Pluto at 11:55 Libra. That's partile, very, very strong for life force and vitality. We talked about Mars and the Sun being very strong for vitality planets, the yang, life force energy planets. Pluto can be, Pluto is power. So Pluto will just, Pluto Mars or Pluto Sun in favorable aspect. Very strong for physical stamina, strong constitution, and vital force. And here we have all three lined up in what's called that minor grand trine. So you've got a trine between Mars and Pluto, and then the Sun is in a perfect sextile, partile sextile to both Pluto and Mars. So that gives us a lot of information. That's that supernatural strength and vitality that we were looking for there.
That's a lot of goodness right there. That's for sure.
Yeah, and not only that, Mars also that planet that's like, yang, vitality, and also competition, right? And war, right? The war god, it's conjunct a lot of fortune. which, you know, some people may or may not use, but that's beneficial. The lot of fortune is also a good luck. It's also a good luck degree in your chart. Conjunct Mars gives Mars that little extra good fortune, that little extra power. This is a true competitor, someone who has that very strong resilience and life force. So not only strong vitality, but able to really bounce back. Because Pluto not only represents power, it also represents regeneration ability. How strong is your ability to come back from adversity, to come back from illness and injury? That's one thing that sometimes Pluto will show you in the chart. So this was a very good chart. Also, we look at the ruler of the 6th house, which is very important for health and wellness. If we use the, he also, by the way, he also has a grand trine in fire. Okay, as if this chart already wasn't lucky enough, right? Sun, 11 degrees Leo, Neptune, 13 degrees Sagittarius, and the moon at 6 degrees Aries. Grand trine in fire. Fire is that vitality. Again, fire is the life force energy. So this guy just has enormous vitality, all written all over his chart in the energy patterns. The ruler of the 6th house, I was going to say, is Jupiter. And Jupiter, again, has that favorable conjunction with Venus. So that is also very favorable. He does have a complicated, one of those complicated body-mind problems here with Pluto in the 12th opposing the moon in the 6th. So, you know, we have to see how playing 20 years in the NFL, whether that's going to age well or not. He may have a lot of problems down the road with Pluto hard aspects. We oftentimes see the person pushes themselves past the normal psychological and physical limits. And that long term can end up being very problematic, especially from the 12th to the 6th. So that's a worrisome concern. Let's look at another chart here. LeBron James, also, you know, this guy is a bulldozer. He's a tank. He's one of the just physically strongest players in the NFL, excuse me, in the NBA. I mean, in addition to just being an incredibly talented basketball player, he's just physically just dominates the game. And so we also want to see, like, okay, well, what, you know, we want to see something really special in this chart. 3-time NBA, you know, championship, 8 consecutive NBA championship league appearances.
That's crazy. That's just crazy. These guys have got some good long-term careers going here, and some excessive, like, just there's like, I don't want to say excessive, but there's just like a lot of good stamina. I mean, you've got to have that just to even age as a human being, and to keep the level of stamina that they have is phenomenal.
Well, it's just really amazing to see how the astrology correlates so tightly, because it's just showing us exactly what we would expect to see, you know. And what's interesting, you know, in LeBron James' chart is he has that exact same Mars partile. So let's just go back to Brady's chart here. Brady has that 11 degree Mars at 11 Gemini, is in a partile trine, air trine to Pluto, 11 degrees Libra. LeBron James, same thing. 4 degrees, Mars at 4 Pisces in a partile trine to Pluto at 4 Scorpio. So we know that a partile trine between Mars and Pluto is very, very favorable for physical strength, stamina, resiliency, and a great competitive spirit. This is the kind of thing that gives a supernatural, almost supernatural physical strength. So if you have that in your chart, that means that you have those same qualities as Tom Brady and LeBron James.
That might be some good news for you. And just in case, because I have a question down here, when we say partile, what it means is that the planets are in the exact degree with each other. So we see LeBron's chart that Mars is at 4 degrees. And when we look down to Pluto, Pluto is also 4 degrees. It just means exact. So just
it doesn't, well, it doesn't mean exact, actually. Exact would mean that they were at the same minute and seconds of degree and minute.
Sure.
Now, in the case of LeBron James, they are almost exact. They're within three minutes. So 417 to 420. So that's that's super powerful. It's a little bit wider in Tom Brady.
Sure.
Exact is different. Exact is a whole other thing.
Yeah.
When
So
you see an exact aspect, that's the same minute and seconds of degree. Let me see. Just in Brady, it's 11:55 to 11:45. So about 10 seconds off there, 10 minutes off. Excuse me.
sure.
Yes, but partile, yeah, if the number of the degree is the same, like even if it's, if it was, let's just say, for example, it was 501 versus 458, it's actually closer, but it's not partile. You lose the partile. The partile makes a huge difference.
Yeah. So just to clear that up, someone was asking what that word means, but that's what you're looking for.
Yes,
Okay.
in the same degree. It means in the same degree.
Sure.
And LeBron James has a slightly different component here. He's got Neptune is actually sextiling Mars and Pluto. So that's that nice balance between grace and power. He's also got, which is interesting, is Uranus Mercury conjunction. In this case, this is interesting because the ruler of the ascendant, this is an exception to my saying that the ruler of the ascendant gives you the tone of the chart. This is a more complex, because the ruler of the ascendant is Mercury. Mercury is actually debilitated here in Sagittarius. So that's interesting to see that in LeBron James' case. And of course, LeBron James came from a really difficult childhood, I believe. I don't remember the exact details, but I think he grew up with like a single mom in poverty. I can't remember what happened to his father, if he was in jail or had some drug problems or something like that. But I know I saw a documentary about him years ago. I know he came from very adverse conditions, and of course became one of them. Even in high school, was a super dominant. I think he went to the national championships as a high school player. His Mercury is conjunct Uranus, which is very interesting, in the 6th. Now, that's a sign of genius, actually. That's a sign of someone who is an innovative, outside-the-box thinker, somebody who's like a creative genius, but it's also can be someone who may be psychologically unstable in some way. It's like the mad scientist. And it's also that's a little bit challenging on the nervous system. The nervous system can really get overstimulated with that Mercury Uranus in the 6th. However, it does have a favorable trine to the moon, which is balancing and offsetting and making it more favorable generally. Yeah. Now, one thing that's interesting is if we look at the traditional ruler of the 6th house, it's Mars. Mars rules Scorpio in traditional astrology. Well, Mars has that partile trine to Pluto and that sextile to Neptune. So that tells us there's something very special about this guy's health. Health is not a problem. He's got super strength. But of course, he's got Saturn in the 6th. So that could also be, somewhat problematic. It's in a sextile to Jupiter, which is favorable. It's in a square to Venus, which is unfavorable. So that could indicate some problems with the kidneys, as ruled by Venus. So there's some everybody has weaknesses, right? Even superstars like LeBron James and Tom Brady are going to have some weak points in their chart. But overall, this is a very favorable chart for vitality and strength, and also creative. Creative. He's maybe a strategic genius when it comes to basketball strategy. And you see that same thing in Tom Brady's chart. He also has a Mercury Uranus in a very tight sextile. It's only 18 minutes from 8 degrees Virgo. Now his Mercury has dignity in Virgo, and he has that sextile to Uranus. So also a sign of creativity, creative genius, strategic genius. Okay, let's look at one more chart here of a celebrity before we go to your viewers' charts that we selected. I've got a lot of charts here in this presentation. But I want to go to Angelina Jolie's chart really quickly, if we could.
Yeah.
She has a very fascinating chart. She had a double mastectomy because of the inherited BRCA gene that gave her an increased risk of breast cancer in her life. So one of the things I wondered was whether medical astrology would have agreed with her choice to have a prophylactic double mastectomy. She didn't have breast cancer. She had a double mastectomy to prevent breast cancer. It was kind of a bold choice. So I wanted to see if astrology would have agreed with her decision, medical astrology.
Mhm.
The main planet that we want to look at in medical astrology for breast problems is the moon, and also the sign of Cancer. So this is a little bit, little bit less about looking at the vital force and more just about looking at medical astrology. Would traditional medical astrology have agreed with her decision to get the double mastectomy to prevent breast cancer? And we look at her chart, and it's very interesting. First of all, the most interesting thing we note is that she's a Cancer rising. That's the sign that has to do with the breasts. So that's just in and of itself, it's kind of interesting because she became somewhat famous actually for this decision to have a mastectomy. Now she's got a partile conjunction of Venus to the ascendant, and that is very famous for great beauty, being known as a very traditionally beautiful, right? Venus is the god of love and beauty. And so that's just interesting. She is, of course, widely considered to be one of the most beautiful women in the world. Of course, was married to Brad Pitt, widely considered to be one of the most beautiful men in the world. So that was kind of interesting to see that. You oftentimes will see, Venus. Leonardo DiCaprio, I think he's got the Sun conjunct Venus.
Oh gosh. That is just
Another, widely considered to be very beautiful male.
Mhm.
So that gives her, the moon is actually the lord of her ascendant. And in this case of Angelina Jolie, the moon is really unfortunately caught in what I call a perfect storm here for breast problems and potentially life-threatening breast cancer. The moon it's sandwiched in between both malefics. It has a conjunction to Mars and a square to Saturn. Okay, very, very difficult. Moon square to Saturn can indicate very chronic, stubborn, difficult health problems, especially with Saturn in the 12th. And that can be inherited problems, that can be past life karma problems, which of course, what is genetics but some type of past life karmic situation that we inherited. It's also opposing Pluto. So the moon is conjunct Mars, square Saturn, and opposing Pluto. It's hard to imagine a worse configuration.
Yeah, and it is really tight there-ish with Jupiter, which is good at expanding the problems you're already having.
Yes, we think of Jupiter as the great benefic, and it can be a lucky planet of good fortune, but it can also, in some cases, make problems worse.
Mhm.
And it's also can be indicated for excessive growth, which of course is what Cancer is associated with. It's usually more associated with benign tumors, but in this case, Pluto Moon opposition is definitely associated with life-threatening health problems, and then the square to Saturn can be inherited. This comes from the Handbook of Medical Astrology by Jane Ritter Patrick. On page 78 and 79, she says that Moon Saturn afflictions can show up as hereditary diseases. Okay, check off number one, the BRCA gene increases your risk of breast cancer. And that number two, Moon Pluto aspects are associated with life-threatening conditions like cancer. Okay, so in this case, I think medical astrology would indeed agree that Angelina Jolie made the correct decision
Sure.
to have that. So it's just interesting to see that, time and time again, medical astrology will just give you that extra layer of information.
Yeah. How neat. This is,
whether it's looking at extraordinary physical stamina or whether it's looking at very complicated health problems.
yeah, but it's also neat to talk about it, see what's happening out in the world, but then kind of be able to pull it back into the chart and follow the lines and the tracing. And I know that people have made the claim or the statement, you can go find anything in astrology to relate to what's going on. But most of the time we can see it here first. That's kind of the real benefit of astrology, right? Is its speed and availability to do things beforehand, which is beautiful.
Exactly. I mean, it can show you, when you're relatively young and healthy, it can already show you that you may have a tendency to weaknesses in certain organ systems. And so that allows you, theoretically, to take better care of yourself, to eat a better diet, and to already start thinking about, like, okay, what kind of herbs, what kind of foods are going to be beneficial for that organ system that astrology says I have a constitutional weakness there. Or if just in general, the constitutional life force is in a weakened state, you can start practicing things like Qigong or acupuncture to strengthen your vital force. Astrology can just be helpful on so many different levels that way.
Absolutely. Should we look at one of the charts we've chosen? See what
Yes.
we've got here?
Okay, let me just look at which is going to provide. We can look at, I have about 15, 20 minutes here. And let me just look at which one's going to be the really give us the good examples. I think I have one of them already pulled up, so let's just look at that one.
Okay, perfect. So Andrea is asking, does Robert do health chart readings? Yes, indeed he does. And I will make sure that you have all of his contact information in the description box underneath this video so you can check him out and maybe.
Yeah, and if you're in the Seattle area, you can actually come and visit me in person and get pulse and abdominal and tongue diagnosis and acupuncture treatment. If you're not in the Seattle area, then we can do a medical chart reading over Zoom.
Yeah, so it's accessible today, which is beautiful.
Okay, so we're a little typo here. This is actually Becky, I think. The person that you sent me. I don't know why it came out like that, but anyway, this is Becky, whose chart you sent me a couple of days ago. She was born on February 6, 1971 at 1:14 a.m. in Canada, Edson, Alberta. And I don't know, Becky, I don't know if you're out there listening, but if you are, we're going to apply, some of my step-by-step approach to looking at the chart. And I made a couple of notes here. Okay, so this was a little bit more of a complicated chart.
Yeah.
This one definitely shows some potential health problems.
Which is, I want to share this real quick too before we jump in here, is that Becky and I have had a chance to sit together, and when she suggested her chart out as well, I couldn't have been happier because we've walked through many of the things she's had going on health-wise. So it was so beautiful to get it in your hands as well.
And I know absolutely nothing about Becky. I don't know anything about her symptoms, her health. All I've done is look at the chart.
Yeah.
I probably should have asked you that beforehand, but
no, this is great. This is beautiful. Right. Because
I'm really being tested. I'm really on the spot.
No.
The rule of the ascendant here, of course, the ascendant is Scorpio rising. So, and I use the porphyry house system, by the way. I find it, I like the equal division of the quadrants, essentially. I think that works really well. I don't like whole house. I know that's very popular these days, is whole sign houses. I don't like it when the ascendant and the midheaven aren't the first house cusps. Something just makes me, it just rubs me the wrong way. So anyway, I've been using porphyry for 20 years and I continue to use it. In this case, we've got, again, Scorpio rising. That gives us a Mars ruler. Mars is in a fire sign, which is nice. It's in the first house, which is nice. So I like that. However, it's also conjunct Jupiter, which is good. And Jupiter has dignity here in Sagittarius in the first house. So those are all good so far. I like that. I like those setups. However, Mars is also conjunct Neptune.
Yes.
That watery, even though it's in Sagittarius, the watery, dampening, dissipating energy of Neptune is not compatible with the energy of Mars. It will dampen the fiery vital life force of Mars. So that's an unfavorable. It's a stellium really with Jupiter, Neptune. I mean, Jupiter, Neptune, right, is like super high vibration, super high spiritual consciousness.
Sure.
So that's a favorable. But in medical astrology, that the Neptune Mars conjunction part of this stellium is somewhat unfavorable for kind of weakening the life force to a certain degree. I mean, Scorpio rising is actually pretty good for life energy because it's very fierce. It's very resilient. It's very fierce. It is a strong life energy sign because it's ruled by Mars. It's a battle sign. It has a fierceness, a toughness to it that is good for health because it's very resilient. It has that ability to regenerate itself. Okay, so the ascendant we like, but the ruler in the first house we like. The conjunction to Neptune we don't like.
That's challenging. It's like
weakening to the life force.
yeah.
What's most concerning in this chart is actually the partile square. There's that word partile again, between Saturn and the Sun. This is actually kind of complicated. This is a complicated medical chart because first of all, the Sun is debilitated in Aquarius, the coldest time of the year, right? The Sun, again, is we like it to be warm. That's the coldest, driest time of the year. So the Sun is a little weakened and debilitated by the sign placement. It's also weakened by a square to Saturn because Saturn is kind of doing the same thing that Neptune is doing to Mars in a way. It's a different action, but it's very similar. It's dampening the life energy, essentially it's just dampening the life energy of the Sun here. And the Sun, Saturn squares and oppositions, they just tend to cause chronic, stubborn health problems in the chart. Of course, Saturn's in the 7th house, so maybe, more specifically related to relationships, you could talk about that on a different program with a relationship reading. But for vitality, it's not great. It's not great. There's a lot of different ways to look at that. Now, the Sun is also conjunct the North Node, which actually adds energy to the vital force. So that's like a fractal in a way here, because you've got kind of a similar thing with Mars. You've got Jupiter is adding energy to the life force where Neptune is weakening that yang life force energy there. So that's kind of interesting. Let me see what else is going on here. Yeah, so this is a complicated.
Sure.
This is a complicated reading. Elementally, the moon and the ascendant in water. Okay, it's pretty balanced elementally. Nothing is really too far off. She's got good fire.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty good. Mars is also the ruler of the 6th house here, which is another thing we look at. And I didn't break down the chart really. I didn't have enough time to break it down aspect by aspect.
Sure.
So I looked at it. I looked at it more pretty quickly here. Those were the things that really stood out. So this was a complex thing, but I think the main things are that there's definitely the vital force. The Sun is debilitated and by sign and by an aspect of the square to Saturn. So this person does have to be very careful with how they use their vital force with their vitality. Their stamina, physical energy, and strength is not that strong. Even though there are some offsetting favorables that are helpful and supportive for health, overall the person has to be careful of, not pushing themselves not pushing themselves too hard past their limits, not, overwork, overplay, overtraining in sports, oversex. All of these things like moderation and balance has to be the key here. And again, like I mentioned previously, balancing supportive things like making sure they get enough sleep, maybe doing Tai Chi or Qigong or yoga practice to supplement the life force, doing acupuncture treatments on a regular basis to supplement the life force. The Sun also specifically has to do with the heart. So the fact that it's debilitated in Aquarius and square Saturn may indicate this person, I think, is still, okay, not that young, approaching 50. As they get older, they may have to take special care, you know, of their heart. They may have a tendency towards some type of heart disease or heart problem. And so they have to be careful to eat healthy diet that's low in saturated fats, make sure they get cardiovascular exercise, because their heart in general may have a constitutional weakness.
So yeah, so if we're gonna leave Becky with one thought on how to let the vitality be as strong as it can be, what do you think? I mean, I definitely agree. The overstimulation is something that definitely would need to be watched here for sure, especially with Neptune involved. We're maybe fighting something we can't see.
Yes, Neptune is famous for kind of confusing, difficult to diagnose health problems, and that's affecting Mars. And that Mars rules the adrenal glands, and also like the immune system and the adrenal glands and the sex hormones with Mars. So that could be, you've got a situation here where it's like a bit, maybe, you know, it can be ramped up easily by Jupiter, but maybe overdoing it. So there could be a tendency to overdo it here with Jupiter, and then the adrenals get burned out, and then you get an adrenal fatigue syndrome, which is more consistent with the Neptune conjunction. So sometimes you'll see these kind of complicated patterns where they alternate, where the person has super high energy and maybe overdoes it, and then that's followed by a crash. And then they have an adrenal fatigue syndrome where they have to nurse themselves back to health. So that can create, that's kind of a complex stellium there in the first house.
Yeah, absolutely.
So one thing, I mean, I don't know, you know, this is a case where I'd have to do a consultation, a health history questionnaire with the person and talk with them about what are their symptoms, how does this manifest in their life personally. And when I do a medical reading, I always send out a questionnaire beforehand to find out, you know, I don't just try to guess.
Right.
I mean, I'm good, but I'm not that good. I do a full, you know, the person has to tell me their health situation, what their symptoms are, what conditions, what their Western diagnosis is, what herbs or medication they're taking, and so forth and so on, like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
This
yeah,
is
but just
good.
moderation. I would say the key words here are moderation and balance. Moderation and balance.
Absolutely. Oh man. Well, thank you for going through some charts with us. And hopefully you guys out there are able to grab your charts and start to take a look around at some of the methods Robert uses when he's looking at assessing the vitality in the chart, and see where this works out for you in your own chart. I can tell you guys that in my chart, I have Saturn and Mars doing all sorts of little interesting dances together, and Aquarius in the 6th house. So it'd be interesting to see what you've got going on in your chart. So if you don't have a chart, make sure that you snag one. And if you're looking for consultation, you want to meet with Robert, you have questions, I will make sure all of his information is in the description box in the video down below, and you can definitely get in contact.
I just got one last chart here real quick. We could take a look before I have to run, for my next client is actually coming in about 10-15 minutes. But
Sure.
This is an example of a chart that had a pretty good vitality. This was Dale. Let's see, the ruler of the ascendant was the moon here in Gemini, and it had a nice trine to Uranus. So that was favorable, that was supportive. What I really liked was the fire trine from Jupiter to the sun. The sun is exalted in Aries. This is pretty rare. I wanted to pull up this chart real quick because this is pretty rare, actually. I mean, Jupiter Sun trines are supportive for health, but they don't give like that supernatural vitality that you see with Mars Pluto trines. Jupiter trines are kind of lazy, they're more laid back. But this one is very special because Jupiter has dignity in Sagittarius, and it's ruling and it's trining an exalted sun in Aries. So that's pretty cool. That's pretty special. That's very favorable and good for the life force. Neptune is also involved there with that trine, and we see that same trine that we had in that both of those people were born in 1971. Now, this was interesting too. He's got Mars exalted also in the 6th. So that gives maybe a special quality, something that's beneficial with health or his work. Maybe he works with sharp tools or sharp implements. He's very skilled with Mars, some type of Mars activity. That would be a good placement for a surgeon. Mars exalted in the 6th house. That's actually known to be very famous. Or an acupuncturist. I have Mars with dignity in Scorpio, and I work with sharp metal needles. But on the other hand here, Mars is square the sun from the 6th. Okay, so that's not Mars exalted is square an exalted sun. That's almost like a little bit too much energy there. And so that's worrisome. That could be an indication towards inflammation or what I call pathogenic heat. So all sorts of hot conditions that are, again, that could be a tendency towards injuries and inflammation, strains and sprains of some type, or some type of infections could be problematic here with those Mars squares. Injuries and infections are, Mars is famous for that. Accidents, injuries, infections, pathogenic heat. He could have some type of viral infection that causes a kind of low-grade pathogenic heat. So Mars in the 6th is a bit problematic, especially in square to the sun. So that's an unfavorable. Anyway, just looking at some quick, just wanted to throw that one up there because that had some really, this chart has some really interesting, both favorable and unfavorable. I don't know if there's any questions. I could take one question before I have to run.
Yes, perfect. There is actually one question. So
okay.
this person has, I mean, there's more than one question, but one I think is perfect. But so this person said, from the talk today, for just a regular lay person or someone just starting out, what's the number one thing they can look at to assess the vitality?
You know, yeah, fortunately, it's just not that simple.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, you know, I talked about the ruler of the ascendant, you know, the condition of the sun and Mars. I mean, those are things you want to look at. Unfortunately, astrology is too complex to break it down to one thing.
Yeah.
You know, it's really can be dangerous to try to break it down into just one easily digestible thing. Unfortunately, there's just too many factors. But aspects to the sun are important, aspects to Mars. In this case, we have that aspect. We have a, you know, in LeBron James and Tom Brady, we saw the favorable aspect, the soft aspect from Mars to the sun. In this person's case, we have a hard aspect from Mars to the sun. So again, that's like the person could be, you know, could have a problem with anger, frustration, or resentment that could be negatively affecting his physical health. Again, I don't know this person at all, so I'm just throwing that out there as possibilities.
Sure.
Again, rash, impulsive behavior. They could push themselves also, kind of like Pluto, they could push themselves a little bit too hard. They're maybe a little bit too competitive. And they don't know their physical limits with Mars in the 6th square of the sun. They push themselves too hard, and that ends up with injuries or accidents, strains, sprains, you know, pulling a muscle, tearing a ligament, spraining an ankle. With Capricorn, that's actually the knees, you know, and the joints in general. So there could be our tendency to arthritis, or there could be, you know, even an autoimmune disease like that autoimmune type of arthritis, not the osteoarthritis, but stuff like that. So just some examples like that. But there's really too many different things to look at to boil it down to one thing. It's so hard to boil it down to one thing.
Yeah.
I don't know if I can answer that question. Really have to study. You have to study astrology and look at the really variety of factors, because every chart is going to have such a different and complicated mix of factors.
Sure. And don't be afraid to study slow and to keep studying. I could think any one of us who is practicing will tell you we continue to study. So if you're going low and slow, that's just fine. Get your basics under your feet, because that's going to give you a lot of information to work with right there and then just build in layers. Low and slow is just fine. So Robert, thank you so much. I know you've got to get going, but thank you so much for coming and sharing with us. And you guys, again, the links will be in the description box down below so you can check it out. And if there are more medical astrology questions, maybe we'll have Robert back or we'll figure it out. So if you've got questions, leave them in the comment section down below. Like this video, comment, share, subscribe, and I will see you guys next time. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.